My boss laughed right in my face when he handed me the termination letter. That same laugh still echoes in my head, only now it reminds me of how fast power can flip. He said I wasn't the right style for the company. Not that I wasn't good enough. Not that my work was poor. Just that I didn't look the part. The guy in $1,000 suit told me I lacked brand appeal, while I'd been the one keeping clients from walking out. Before I go on, if you enjoy stories about hitting rock bottom and climbing back stronger, subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. He walked me out himself, loud enough for everyone to see. No hard feelings, as he said, but his smirk told a different story. My coworkers didn't even look at me. They just stared at their screens, pretending not to hear the boss's laughter. I carried my box of stuff past them, each step heavier than the last. Outside, I sat on the curb with that same stupid box and asked myself, what now? Years of loyalty, erased by one sentence. You don't have style. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his grin. The humiliation burned, but under it, something started to shift. Anger. Drive. Whatever it was, it felt sharper than pain. I told myself one thing. If they don't think I fit their world, I'll build my own. Next morning, I started looking for work. Nobody wanted to hire a guy who didn't fit the brand. So I worked whatever came my way, deliveries, freelance marketing, anything that paid rent. And every job taught me something. I started seeing what businesses actually needed, not what fancy agencies pretended to sell. That's when the idea hit me. What if I built a service that focused on results, not image? No buzzwords, no fake corporate culture, just performance. I found small businesses tired of fake promises. They didn't care about style, eh? They cared about getting things done. I gave them real strategies, fair prices, and honest work. The first month, I barely made rent. The second, I tripled my income. By the third, one of their former clients reached out to me directly. You're easier to trust now, they said. You're not pretending to be one of them. That line stuck with me. Maybe being without style wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was freedom. I wasn't trapped by image anymore. I could build something real. I pinned a photo of that old office above my desk. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that laugh and how it felt to walk out of those doors. I promised myself that one day I'd walk back in, but not as an employee, as the owner. Because when someone laughs at you like that, you don't forget it. You let it burn until the fire becomes your purpose. Starting over felt like waking up in a world that didn't remember my name. One day, I was managing six-figure accounts, running meetings in glass offices. The next, I was sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by takeout boxes, using a borrowed laptop to pitch marketing help to local businesses that barely had websites. It wasn't glamorous, it was survival. But desperation does something powerful. It strips away pride. I stopped caring how things looked and focused on what worked. I made cold calls all day, wrote proposals at night, and delivered results however I could. Some days I'd walk into a client's shop smelling like printer ink and stale coffee, but I showed up. And slowly people started to notice. My first client was a family-run cafe that was about to close. Their social media was dead, their foot traffic worse. I didn't promise miracles, I promised effort. I spent nights photographing their menu myself, running simple ads with what little budget they had. A month later, they called me in tears. Their weekend sales had doubled. That single moment hit me harder than any corporate bonus I'd ever gotten. Someone trusted me and I delivered. Word spread fast. Small businesses talk. Within a few weeks, I had 3 more clients. All struggling, all tired of stylish agencies that talked pretty and produced nothing. I wasn't on brand, but I was effective. Of course, it wasn't smooth. I'd get ghosted by potential leads, underpaid by others, and sometimes spent nights wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. There were days I'd wake up with my stomach in knots, unsure if I could pay rent, but every small win built momentum. Each grateful message from a client was fuel. A few months in, I started noticing something interesting. Some of the businesses reaching out to me had left my old company. Different clients, same complaints, overpromised, underdelivered, and overcharged. They didn't recognize me at first, but I recognized them, and I kept my poker face, listening carefully as they vented about how the agency got too focused on image. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I studied. I watched how those big firms operated. Their flashy pitches, their overpriced campaigns, their total lack of follow through. I knew their weaknesses better than anyone because I'd lived them. My old boss once said I wasn't fit for strategy. Now I was building my own playbook. To scale up, I needed systems. I spent nights teaching myself automation, analytics, and management. I built templates, tracked data, and turned every client success into a case study. I wasn't just freelancing anymore, I was building something real. Then one day, something unexpected happened. I got an email from a former colleague, someone who'd seen me get walked out. She sounded desperate. Their department was collapsing under pressure and clients were leaving fast. She said the company was different now. Code for, it's falling apart. I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the screen, remembering every smug face in that office. Part of me wanted to write something cutting, something that would make her feel how I once felt. But instead, I smiled, because I knew the best revenge wasn't saying anything. It was growing quietly until they couldn't ignore me anymore. So I kept building. Month after month, my roster grew. The same people who once saw me as an outsider were now asking me for advice. My name started showing up on industry forums. I wasn't famous, not yet, but I was on the radar. And that's when I realized something. My old boss hadn't fired me because I lacked style. He'd fired me because I didn't fit his control. He couldn't shape me, so he removed me. But that decision, his arrogance, was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because now I wasn't just surviving, I was coming for the market he thought he owned. Success doesn't come quietly. It starts as a whisper, then someone notices, and suddenly it's too loud to ignore. By the time my fourth client signed on, I'd started making real money. Nothing crazy, but enough to breathe. Enough to stop checking my bank balance before every grocery run. That's when I heard from someone I never expected. Nate, a former coworker from the old agency. The guy was a walking suit ad, one of my boss's favorites. His message was short. Heard you're doing freelance now. Clients say you're undercutting prices. Careful, man. That could ruin your reputation. Reputation. The same people who threw me out for not having style suddenly cared about ethics? I laughed and moved on, but a week later one of my clients called in a panic. Someone had emailed them claiming I wasn't legitimate, that I was a disgruntled ex-employee trying to scam small businesses. That was their play. Subtle, cruel, but just clean enough to avoid consequences. I never had proof, but I didn't need it. The timing was too perfect. My old company had noticed me and they were trying to snuff me out before I became a threat. The client stayed, they trusted me by then, but I learned a valuable lesson. When you start rising, expect pushback. I could have fought it publicly, but that's not how you win wars like this. Not by shouting, by outlasting. So I went quiet, focused harder. I built a simple, scalable process that worked so well it shocked even me. Clients started recommending me on business forums. My name began appearing in referral chains online. Every project was another crack in the image of my old boss's perfect brand. One night, I got a message from a client, a mid-sized apparel startup. They'd fired the very agency I used to work for and wanted me to clean up the mess. Their campaign had tanked. I opened their files and sure enough, lazy work, no data, just glossy nonsense. I stayed up 3 nights fixing it line by line. When I launched my new campaign, it tripled their traffic in 2 weeks. The best part? My ex-company had to watch it happen publicly. The client posted about it on LinkedIn, tagging me by name. My inbox exploded overnight. Messages, offers, collaboration invites. Suddenly, I wasn't the guy without style. I was the one fixing what stylish people broke. But attention brings shadows. I started getting calls from unknown numbers, silent lines, clicks, hangups. Then one day, a private message popped up on my business page. You should remember who helped you get started. No name, no context. Just that. I knew exactly who it was meant to sound like. My old boss had always played mind games, humiliation disguised as mentorship. He wanted me to feel small again, to doubt myself. Instead, I laughed, because if he was paying attention, it meant one thing. I was finally on his radar. Still, I won't lie, it messed with my head. For days, I couldn't shake that sense of being watched. Every success felt like it came with a target on my back. But fear is a strange motivator. It can crush you or it can shape you. I chose the latter. I doubled down on work, hired my first assistant, a smart, detail-oriented girl named Jordan who believed in the mission. We worked out of a tiny co-working space that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. She'd often joke, this feels like a startup movie montage. And she was right. The momentum was real. Every late night, every small victory added up to something big. I could feel it building, like pressure behind a dam. Then, just when I thought I'd stabilized, I got an email from a corporate domain I hadn't seen in years. The subject line was short, but it froze me in place. Partnership inquiry from RM Industries. That was them, my old company, my old boss. The same people who'd humiliated me were now reaching out for help. The war had officially begun. That email from RM Industries sat in my inbox for 3 hours before I opened it. I must have stared at the subject line 100 times, the memory of my old boss's smirk flashing in my head every few seconds. The irony was almost cinematic. The same people who'd called me off-brand were now asking me for help. The message was formal, cold, and unsigned. We've reviewed your recent case studies and believe there's potential for collaboration. Please contact our department lead if interested. I didn't need a signature to know who had written it. The tone was too familiar, too smug. I didn't reply immediately. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Over the next week, 3 different people from their company reached out, all pretending it was just business, as if I hadn't been escorted out of their building like a criminal years ago. I kept every email, every message. I wasn't ready to respond, but I was ready to listen. Meanwhile, my own company was growing faster than I'd ever imagined. Jordan was now managing client communication full-time, and I'd brought in 2 freelancers to handle design and analytics. We were small, but our work hit hard. Results spoke louder than any glossy presentation my old company could print. One night, as I was reviewing numbers, Jordan leaned over and said, "You realize they're only reaching out because they're desperate, right?" I nodded. She wasn't wrong. Their reputation had been crumbling quietly. Client departures, bad reviews, internal turnover. Word travels fast in our industry. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. What if I could actually use this? I didn't just want to compete with them anymore. I wanted to understand their weak points from the inside. So I agreed to a meeting. It was virtual, safer that way. When the camera turned on, I almost laughed. There he was. My old boss, Richard Mason. The man who told me I didn't fit the image. His hair was thinner, his confidence shakier, but the fake charm was the same. "Long time no see," he said, smiling like we were old friends. "You've done well for yourself. I'll admit, I didn't expect to see your name popping up everywhere." I kept my expression neutral. Guess I found my style after all. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's talk business," he said quickly. "We're restructuring, and we could use some external expertise. I think your niche approach might help us reconnect with smaller clients." Translation: we're losing money, and we need you to fix it. For the next half hour, I let him talk about their new direction, their vision, and how partnership would benefit both of us. He danced around the fact that I used to work for him. Not once did he acknowledge how it ended. When he finally paused, I said, "I'll consider it. Send me the details." I ended the call before he could say anything else. My heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from something sharper: power. For the first time, he needed me. Over the next few weeks, I dug deeper. Through contacts, forms, and whispers from mutual acquaintances, I pieced together the real story. They'd lost half their client base, their top designers had quit, and investors were getting nervous. The empire was cracking, and no one was admitting it publicly. I didn't rush. I played it slow, polite, professional. Every response I sent was measured, calculated. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him thinking he still had control. Then came the proposal, a contract draft offering strategic partnership and advisory role. With generous pay, but buried in the fine print, I spotted something interesting: full access to their client analytics and internal reports. They thought I wouldn't notice. I smiled. That access was all I needed. I agreed to a short-term consulting arrangement. To them, it looked like a win. To me, it was reconnaissance. I spent weeks quietly reviewing their systems, data, and processes, all legally, all by the book. And what I found confirmed everything I'd suspected. They were a house of cards: overspending, poor retention, no innovation. Every night, I documented everything. Not to destroy them, not yet, but to prepare for something bigger, something final. Richard had no idea. He thought he'd brought me in to clean up his mess, but in reality, he'd just handed me the blueprint for his company's collapse. And I intended to use it. Consulting for RM Industries was like stepping back into a ghost of my past. Only now, I was the one holding the flashlight. The company that once prided itself on style and sophistication was running on fumes. The office vibe had shifted from arrogance to quiet panic. Every email I received confirmed it: missed deadlines, shrinking client lists, internal memos filled with excuses. From day one, I knew I wasn't there to save them. I was there to understand how deep the rot went. I played the part of the helpful outsider, the professional advisor, but beneath the polite tone of every meeting, I was collecting information: systems, budgets, vendor lists, client feedback. It wasn't illegal. They gave me access willingly. But I made sure to remember every weak spot. Richard, my old boss, tried to act like he was still in control. He'd talk too much in meetings, over-explaining simple strategies just to sound relevant. Once he even said, we'd lost our creative spark when the new generation stopped respecting the classics. I almost laughed. The classics he meant were the same outdated campaigns that had run the company into the ground. The more I learned, the clearer it became. RM Industries wasn't failing because of the market. It was failing because of ego. They were blind to their own decline. And I realized that with the right strategy, I could do more than compete with them. I could replace them entirely. Meanwhile, my own agency, though still small, and was thriving. Jordan managed operations like a pro, and our client base had grown beyond local businesses. We'd started attracting national attention. The funny thing? Half our new clients came directly from RM's failed projects. I didn't need to attack them. Their mistakes were driving business straight to my door. But one thing bothered me: Richard's attitude. The man had no idea he was already standing on a trap door. During one strategy session, he made a little jab, saying, "I suppose this must feel like redemption for you, huh?" His tone was mocking, but behind his smirk, I saw the insecurity. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, redemption is when you fix your own mess. I'm just here to watch." He didn't like that. His smile faltered, just a flicker, but I caught it. After that meeting, things got tense. They started restricting my access to internal data, probably realizing I knew too much. I didn't fight it. I already had what I needed: their numbers, their projections, their debt load. All public enough to verify, but detailed enough for me to see the pattern. They were about 6 months away from collapse if something didn't change. One night, after another long session, Jordan and I sat in the office surrounded by coffee cups and spreadsheets. She looked up from her screen and said, you could buy them. Seriously, you've got investors lining up. With their numbers, it's possible. Her words hit like a spark. I hadn't said it out loud before, but I'd been thinking the same thing. Buying RM Industries, the company that fired me, not just as revenge, but as strategy. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to absorb them, rebuild what they'd wasted, and make it better. The next few weeks were a blur of silent moves. I reached out to a few investors I trusted, people who believed in what we'd built. We talked numbers, logistics, risks. Every conversation felt surreal. 3 years ago, I couldn't afford my rent. Now I was planning to buy my old company. Still, I had to be careful. Richard couldn't know. If he caught wind of it, he'd sabotage the deal before it began. So I stayed in character, helpful, distant, professional. On our last call before I took a break, he said, "You've done good work here. Maybe there's a future partnership beyond this." I smiled. Maybe there is. When the call ended, I closed my laptop and exhaled. My hands were shaking, but not from nerves, from focus. Every move had to be precise. One wrong step, and he'd see it coming. I spent the next month quietly assembling the pieces, investor funding, legal advice, and the perfect intermediary to make the offer. Everything had to look like a routine acquisition proposal from a third party, not from me. Richard had once said I didn't have the style to lead. Soon he'd learn that real leadership isn't about style, it's about timing. And my timing was almost perfect. 2 months. That's how long it took to set the stage. Every document, every phone call, every move had to be exact. One misstep and the entire plan would crumble before it began. I'd done deals before, but never one this personal. This wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting history without ever saying a word. The investors I'd brought on board were sharp. They didn't know the full backstory and only that RM Industries was weak and undervalued. To them, it was a strategic acquisition, a good return on investment. To me, it was poetic justice. We moved quietly. My lawyer, a calm and meticulous woman named Claire, coordinated the entire approach through a holding company that had no visible ties to me. I'd instructed her clearly, keep my name off everything until the ink is dry. She didn't ask why. Maybe she sensed there was more to it. Maybe she didn't care. When the offer finally went out, it landed on Richard Mason's desk like a ticking clock. A clean, professional proposal, acquisition with full retention of staff and leadership, generous severance options, and a promise to restore profitability. Everything about it looked legitimate, because it was, just not in the way he thought. Days passed. No response. Then, a week later, Claire called me. "They're interested," she said. "But your old boss, Mason, he's skeptical. Wants to meet the investors face to face." Of course he did. Control was his comfort zone. He'd never agree to something he didn't think he could dominate. That was fine. I had a plan for that too. We arranged a meeting in a downtown conference room, neutral territory. I didn't attend, not directly. One of the investors, a quiet older man named George, acted as the face of the deal. I watched the entire thing unfold remotely through a private video feed. The moment Richard walked in, I could read his entire mood. He was nervous, trying to mask it under forced confidence. His suit was still immaculate, but there was something off. A stiffness, a crack in the armor. He didn't recognize George, and that alone made him uncomfortable. "So," Richard began, leaning back in his chair, "you're interested in acquiring RM Industries. May I ask what exactly you see in us?" George smiled politely. "Potential. You have brand equity, but it's been under-leveraged. We specialize in revitalizing legacy firms." I almost laughed. The line was perfect. It hit right at Richard's pride. Legacy firm? He heard important. I heard outdated. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I sat watching, my pulse steady, taking in every detail. At one point, Richard tried to show off by quoting numbers that I knew were outdated by at least 6 months. He was bluffing, and George, calm as ever, let him. When it ended, Richard shook hands, smiling again. But this time it was forced. The predator was starting to feel like prey. The next morning, I got an encrypted message from Claire. They've agreed to proceed with due diligence. That was it. The first domino had fallen. As the audit began, I watched from behind the curtain, feeding George and Claire the insights I'd gathered months ago during my consulting phase. Every flaw, every inefficiency, every piece of inflated data, all of it laid out in clean, factual reports. We didn't fabricate anything. We didn't need to. Their own mistakes were enough to make the deal irresistible. Richard, meanwhile, was growing desperate. Word started spreading that the company might be changing hands. Staff morale dropped, rumors flew, and I could practically feel his anxiety from miles away. Still, he tried to keep up appearances. LinkedIn posts about new opportunities, fake optimism, forced smiles in staff meetings. Then came the day Claire called me with a tone I hadn't heard before. Pure satisfaction. They've accepted the offer, she said. It's official. The board signed the preliminary agreement this morning. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The reality of it hit me like a wave. The company that had once humiliated me, that had thrown me out for not being stylish enough, was now mine, or soon would be. But I wasn't celebrating yet. The deal wasn't closed, and Richard was too proud to walk away quietly. I knew he'd make one last move. Something desperate, something emotional. That's how people like him operated. They couldn't stand losing control. So I prepared for it. Every document, every contingency plan, every angle was locked in. This time he wouldn't see it coming until the ink dried and the keys were already in my hand. He taught me that style mattered more than substance. Now I was about to show him what real power looked like. Quiet, strategic, and absolute. The moment the board signed the preliminary agreement, something in Richard changed. I didn't see it at first, not directly, but the signs came fast. Missed meetings, late replies, nervous messages sent at midnight. The man who once strutted through glass hallways like he owned the world was starting to unravel. I knew that feeling well. The fear of losing control, the quiet panic behind a confident face. But unlike me, Richard wasn't built to survive it. He'd built his entire identity around power and appearance. Without those, he was just another man in a suit. 3 weeks after the offer, I heard from Jordan that rumors were spreading fast inside RM Industries. Employees whispered that the new investors were pushing for leadership changes. Richard tried to squash the talk, but people could see through him. One staff member leaked an internal email to a business forum, a bland, overly polished statement about structural optimization. It backfired instantly. Comments poured in about poor management and long overdue change. The walls were closing in. I didn't take joy in it, not exactly, but there was a strange satisfaction in watching karma move at its own pace. I didn't need to humiliate him. He was doing that himself. One afternoon, Claire called with an update. They've started their final review. Mason's pushing back hard, trying to renegotiate terms. He doesn't realize the board already voted him out. Of course he's pushing back, I said. He's not fighting for the company. He's fighting for his reflection. That week, I attended a networking event, the kind ARM used to dominate. The irony hit me as soon as I walked in. Some of their old clients were there now working with me. One of them even mentioned Richard's name with a smirk. He's different these days. Looks like he's carrying the world on his back. I smiled politely but said nothing. The truth didn't need help spreading. A few days later, Richard finally reached out to me directly, an email. Short, but full of cracks between the lines. Appreciate your professionalism throughout this process. Strange how life circles back, isn't it? It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged me without condescension. I stared at that message for a while before replying, "Yes, life has a way of rewarding lessons learned." He didn't respond. Behind the scenes, the acquisition was moving fast. My team was already preparing transition documents, onboarding plans, and press releases. The public wouldn't know for another month, but the deal was effectively done. All that was left was the formal handover and Richard's signature. Claire warned me he might delay it, maybe even sabotage it. "He's unpredictable," she said. "Men like him don't go down gracefully." She was right. 2 days before the signing, he made his last move. He called an emergency board meeting, his attempt to stall the takeover. What he didn't know was that the board already had legal clearance to proceed without him. When he walked into that room, confident and ready for a fight, he found his position already revoked. A contact inside the company told me what happened. Richard stood silent for a full minute when the decision was read out loud. No shouting, no scene, just quiet shock. Then he picked up his pen, signed the final acknowledgement, and left without another word. That night, Claire forwarded me the confirmation email. Transfer complete. Ownership effective immediately. I read it twice before it sank in. The empire that once humiliated me now belonged to the man they'd thrown away. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I thought about the employees, the ones still loyal, still scared about what came next. I'd been in their shoes once. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding something worth believing in. Still, before I closed my laptop, I pulled up Richard's old company profile. The glossy headshot, the arrogant smile. I stared at it for a long moment. "Guess the style didn't save you after all," I whispered. Then I shut the screen and started planning the next phase. Because owning ARM Industries wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of mine. The morning I walked back into that building, the air felt different. It wasn't nostalgia, it was something heavier. The same revolving glass doors that once spun me out into the street now opened at my command. The logo on the wall, the scent of polished floors, even the low hum of office chatter. Nothing had changed, except me. I didn't walk in with a crowd or make an announcement. No cameras, no ceremony. Just me, my ID badge, and a quiet sense of balance settling into place. The receptionist, a new hire, probably unaware of who I was, smiled nervously when I entered. The rest of the office didn't notice at first. People were too busy pretending to look busy, just like the day I'd been fired. Then, one by one, heads started to turn. Whispers followed, soft and disbelieving. "That's him," someone murmured. "The new owner." I kept walking, past the same hallways that once echoed with laughter at my expense. The conference room door was open, the one where Richard had told me I didn't have style. For a moment, I paused. The memory flashed bright and fast like lightning. His grin, the sting, the humiliation. But instead of bitterness, I felt something else. Calm. Because now I owned the very room that once broke me. Jordan joined me a few minutes later, tablet in hand, her smile professional but laced with pride. "They're ready for you upstairs," she said quietly. We took the elevator together. My reflection in the mirrored walls didn't look like revenge, it looked like purpose. When the doors opened, the executive team was waiting in the same boardroom where Richard had once sat at the head of the table. His chair was empty now, pushed slightly aside. The tension in the room was thick. Some faces I recognized. People who'd smirked when I was escorted out years ago. Others were new, watching carefully, unsure of how this was going to go. I let the silence hang for a few seconds before speaking. "Good morning. I know this is uncomfortable. Change always is. But let's make something clear. Yet this isn't a takeover. It's a reset." A few exchanged glances. One manager, bold enough to break the tension, asked, "What happens to us?" "That depends," I said, "on whether you're ready to build or keep the pretending things are fine." No threats, no grand speeches, just truth. The kind they hadn't heard in a long time. I spent the rest of the day walking through departments, talking to people, not as a CEO, but as someone who'd once sat in their chair. Some were nervous, some hopeful. One older employee stopped me in the hall and whispered, "It's good to see someone real in charge again." That hit harder than I expected. By late afternoon, I was in Richard's old office. The blinds were half open, sunlight cutting through in sharp lines. His nameplate was still on the desk. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and placed it in a drawer. Not out of spite, just closure. The office itself was a time capsule of ego, framed awards, luxury pens, and a massive mirror behind the desk. The man had literally built a shrine to himself. I smiled faintly. The first thing I did was take down that mirror. I wanted this place to reflect work, not vanity. As I looked out the window at the city below, I realized the view hadn't changed, but my perspective had. The skyline wasn't intimidating anymore, it was opportunity. Jordan knocked softly and stepped in. "How does it feel?" she asked. I thought for a moment before answering. "It feels clean," like the noise finally stopped. We stood there quietly for a while. Down in the lobby, people were beginning to leave for the day. Normal life, continuing, unaware of how full circle this moment really was. Before leaving, I turned off the lights and glanced one last time at the empty office. "This place took everything from me once," I said softly. "Now it's going to give back, but not to me. To everyone who deserved better." The door clicked shut behind me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking into it, ready to rebuild, ready to lead, and ready for the moment when Richard Mason would finally have to face the man he'd underestimated. That moment was coming soon. And it wouldn't be loud. It would be honest. It took him 2 weeks to reach out. 2 weeks of silence after the handover. I knew he would. Richard Mason wasn't the type to disappear quietly. Men like him don't accept endings, they try to rewrite them. His message came late one evening, just one line. "We should talk." I agreed to meet him at a small coffee shop near the office. Neutral ground, public. I didn't want this to feel like a power play, though every part of it was. When I arrived, he was already there. Same suit, same slicked back hair. But something in his eyes had changed. The sharpness was gone. He looked tired. Human. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," he said, forcing a smirk that barely held. "I almost didn't," I replied, sitting across from him. "But I figured you deserved a conversation." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Deserved? That's generous. You won, I get it. You don't need to pretend you're doing me a favor." I stayed silent. Let him talk. It's what he hated most. He stirred his coffee, hands slightly shaking. "You really pulled it off, huh? I should have seen it coming. You always had a chip on your shoulder." "No," I said calmly. "I had ambition. You just mistook it for defiance." He looked up, studying me like I was a stranger. "So what now? You going to gloat? Rub it in?" I leaned back, meeting his gaze. "No, that's the difference between us. You fired me because you thought success had to look a certain way. I built mine by actually earning it." He exhaled slowly. "Guess that's your victory speech." "Not really," I said. "This isn't about victory, it's about closure." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of clinking cups and distant chatter filled the space between us. Then Richard said something I never expected. "You know, I used to envy you," he murmured. "You had something I never did. People believed in you. They followed you even when they shouldn't have. I could never figure out why." I didn't respond. Not out of pride, but because I could see what he was really saying. He wasn't angry anymore, he was hollow. The empire he'd built had collapsed around him, and for the first time, he was facing a world where his reflection didn't matter. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. Richard, you built a company around image. I'm building one around integrity. That's not revenge, that's progress. He nodded faintly, like he understood, but didn't know how to say it. So, what happens to me now? I paused before answering. That depends on you. I don't fire people for ego. I fire people who stop learning. You can work under me, same as everyone else. Same pay, same standards. No special treatment. His expression froze. He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. The idea of working for me clearly hit him harder than anything I could have said. That's your offer? He finally whispered. I nodded. You taught me what not to become. The least I can do is give you a chance to change. He looked down at his coffee. For a long time, he didn't move. Then quietly, he said, You're a better man than I ever was. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood, placed a business card on the table, and said, Think about it. Then I left. As I walked out into the cool evening air, I felt no triumph, no anger, just peace, the kind that comes when a story finally writes its own ending. A week later, Jordan came into my office holding a folder. You'll want to see this, she said. Inside was an employment form signed by Richard Mason. He'd accepted the offer. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I placed it aside and said, Put him on the onboarding schedule. Treat him like everyone else. Jordan raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. That afternoon, as I looked out the same window Richard once claimed as his own, I realized something profound. Revenge had never been the goal. It was the byproduct of growth. I didn't destroy him. I transformed him. And maybe in some quiet way, that was the greatest revenge of all. It's strange how quiet life becomes after the storm. For years, I dreamed of the moment I'd walk into that office as the man in charge. I thought it would feel explosive, cinematic even, but it didn't. It felt calm, steady, like the universe had just exhaled and said, Now you can start. Owning RMI Industries wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one. The first few months were chaos, the kind that comes with tearing out rot and rebuilding from the foundation up. But this time, I wasn't doing it for ego or image. I was doing it for the people who'd been overlooked, the ones who worked hard in silence while others took credit. We restructured everything. Transparent pay scales, honest leadership, no fake motivational posters, no empty speeches. I made sure everyone knew results mattered, but people mattered more. Slowly, the company that had once been built on arrogance became a place built on trust. Richard kept to himself. He showed up on time, did his work quietly, never challenged me publicly. Some days, I'd catch him looking at me like he still couldn't believe it, like part of him was waiting to wake up from a bad dream. But he stayed. Maybe because deep down he wanted a second chance too. Jordan became head of operations. She ran the place with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to shout. Under her, the culture shifted, clients returned, projects flourished, and within a year we were more profitable than RM had ever been at its peak. Investors called it a turnaround. I called it karma. One afternoon, months after everything had settled, I passed Richard in the hallway. He gave me a small nod, respectful, almost grateful. No words, just an understanding that the story was finally complete. That night, I stayed late in the office. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows, the hum of computers fading into background noise. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel it all, the pain, the humiliation, the grind, the victory. Every piece of it had built the man I'd become. I thought back to that day years ago, walking out of the same building with a cardboard box and a bruised sense of worth. The version of me back then would have wanted revenge served cold. But the man sitting here now understood something deeper. Real revenge isn't about payback, it's about peace. And I'd found mine. Still, I sometimes wonder if I did the right thing, offering him a job instead of cutting him off completely. Maybe mercy was weakness. Maybe it was strength. I don't know. So let me ask you this. Did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place? If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more true revenge tales. Hit like if you think karma found the right target, and drop a comment to tell me how would you have written the ending.